My name is Margaret Hayes and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to share changed my life in ways I never imagined. The day of my husband Robert's funeral was the quietest, loneliest day of my life. As I stood beside his grave, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that sent ice straight through my veins. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My hand shook as I typed back. Who are you? The reply came almost instantly. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. In that moment my world split apart. I turned my eyes to David and Michael, my own boys, standing stiffly near the casket with faces far too calm. Their tears looked staged, their hugs cold and hollow. Something was terribly wrong. For 42 years Robert had been my partner, my anchor, my safe place. I first met him when I was 24 in the little town of Spring Creek. We both grew up on those dusty back roads, clinging to small dreams. I worked cleaning houses to care for my sick mother. While Robert fixed bicycles in the shop his father left him. We didn't have much, but we had the one thing money could never buy: genuine love. I'll never forget the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was heading toward the market in a faded green dress and shoes worn nearly to threads. He stepped out of his bike shop with grease on his hands and gave me a shy smile that made my heart race. "Good morning, Margaret," he said softly. "Want me to take a look at your bike?" I didn't even own one, but I invented some excuse just so I could keep talking to him. That tiny conversation grew into long afternoons under the big oak tree in Town Square Park, then into whispered promises of forever, and finally into a modest little wedding overflowing with hope. The early years weren't easy. We moved into a two-bedroom house with a tin roof that leaked every time it rained, forcing us to set out pots everywhere. But still we were happy. Robert worked sunrise to sunset in his shop while I sewed clothes for women around town. When David was born, my heart nearly burst with joy. He had Robert's big brown eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Michael came along just as perfect. I poured every ounce of myself into raising them, putting my own needs aside without a second thought. Robert was the kind of father every child deserves, taking them fishing on Sundays, teaching them to fix things with their hands, spinning bedtime stories until they fell asleep. I fed them, clothed them, comforted them when they cried. Back then we felt like the tight-knit family I had always dreamed of. But as the boys grew, something shifted. David, always the ambitious one, began questioning why we lived so modestly. Why no car? Why no extras? And of course Michael followed his older brother in everything. When David turned 18, Robert offered him a place at the shop. Instead of gratitude, he sneered. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." That single sentence cut Robert deeper than he let on. At night, I'd catch him sitting on the porch, staring at the stars, sadness written across his face. His son hadn't just rejected the shop. He had rejected Robert's entire way of life. Years passed, and to my surprise, David found success in the city working for a real estate company. Michael wasn't far behind, also climbing the business ladder. Soon they were earning more money than Robert and I had ever dreamed of. First I was so proud. My sons had broken free of poverty, built bigger lives. But gradually my pride twisted into sorrow. Their visits grew rare, their phone calls shorter. And when they did appear, they came in luxury cars, dressed in expensive suits, speaking only about investments and properties. They looked at us with pity, almost shame. "Mom," David said one visit, "you and Dad should really move somewhere nicer. This house is falling apart." He wasn't wrong, the house was old and weary. But to us it was more than walls and wood. It was where we had raised our children, where every meal, every Christmas, every laugh lived. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. Robert, always wise, would shake his head. "Margaret, money's changed our boys. We're not enough for them anymore." I tried not to believe it. I told myself they were just busy. I clung to the hope they'd come back to being those sweet boys I once tucked into bed. But deep down I knew Robert was right. Somewhere along the way we had lost them. The distance only widened after David married Jessica Albright, a woman from the city who never hid her distaste for our simple lives. The first time she stepped onto our porch, her high heels sank into the dirt, and her elegant red dress made me feel smaller than I'd ever felt. "Nice to meet you," she said with a tight smile, barely brushing my fingers with hers. Her eyes scanned our house with open judgment. At dinner, she pushed food around her plate but barely ate. Robert and I had poured love into that meal, and she treated it like scraps. David seemed nervous, apologizing for things he once held dear. I overheard him whisper to her, "Next time we'll take them to a restaurant." He thought I couldn't hear. But I did. And each word stabbed me like a knife. Meanwhile, Michael stayed single but grew just as distant. His visits shrank to holidays, and even then, his eyes were glued to his phone. "Sorry, Mom, I've got an early meeting tomorrow," he'd say, rushing out the door. Family Sundays became a memory. Christmas felt more like a formality. They'd bring lavish gifts we never needed, stay a couple hours and leave relieved. Robert and I grew old together in silence, propping each other up. His hands weakened, but he kept working. My eyes strained, but I still sewed. We never asked for a dime from our successful sons. One night, Robert sighed over coffee on the porch. "Margaret, it's not about the money. It's about how money made them believe we don't matter anymore." He was right, as always. They hadn't just changed their bank accounts, they had changed in their hearts. We were no longer the parents they cherished. We were ghosts of a past they wanted to forget. It only grew worse when David bought a $200,000 home in an exclusive neighborhood, and Michael invested in a $150,000 condo. They were living lives we couldn't even picture. "You should sell this place and move into a retirement community," Jessica suggested one day, her voice syrupy but sharp. "You'd be more comfortable." The word community stung. After 40 years of building our home, after pouring our love into those walls, they wanted to ship us off to some facility. "We don't need a home," Robert replied, his voice steady, his pride intact. "We're fine right here." But the look on my sons' faces told me the truth. They agreed with her. To them, we were a problem to be solved, not people to be loved. Soon after, David arrived with papers already drawn up. "Mom, Dad," he said, wearing that fake smile, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth maybe $1,000, but if you sell it, I can add money so you can move somewhere better. A better place." To him, it was all about numbers. He couldn't see the years, the memories etched into every corner of that house. "And Dad should retire," he added. "He's 70. It's time to rest." Robert's eyes filled with hurt. "Son, working isn't a burden. It's what keeps me alive. Gives my days purpose." But Michael chimed in, backing his brother. "At your age, Dad, it's dangerous. What if you get hurt?" Their words were cloaked as concern, but I sensed impatience, urgency, something darker I couldn't name. The pressure kept mounting. They brought real estate agents without asking us, got the house appraised without permission, even talked about what's best for everyone. "Jessica and I are planning to have kids," David said one evening over dinner. "We'll need help with expenses. If you sell the house and move smaller, that money could be your early inheritance." Early inheritance. He wanted his inheritance before we were even gone. Robert stayed calm, but his jaw tightened. "Son, when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, those choices are ours." "Don't be stubborn," Michael snapped. "You're old now. You can't live in the past forever." That night, Robert and I stayed up until dawn, facing a truth we'd never wanted to see. "Something's not right, Margaret," he said, worry etched in his face. "This isn't just ambition. There's something darker in their eyes." I had no idea how right he was. I couldn't imagine that my own sons were weaving a plan that would shatter our lives completely. The last normal talk I had with David was 3 weeks before Robert's death. He came alone, no Jessica in sight. Sitting at the same kitchen table where he'd eaten 1,000 breakfasts as a boy, he looked serious. "Mom," he said, "no matter what happens, Michael and I will always take care of you." At the time it comforted me. But now, remembering his words at Robert's grave, they chill me to the bone. Why did he say no matter what happens? What did he know that I didn't? The accident came on a Tuesday morning. Robert had gone early to his shop like he always did. I was in the kitchen making his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang. "Mrs. Hayes," a voice said. "This is Memorial Hospital. Your husband's been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The world went blurry. My legs buckled and I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. What happened? Is he alive? Is he conscious? Ma'am, please, come as soon as you can. The drive was a nightmare, Hayes. My neighbor Doris had to take the wheel because I was shaking too badly to hold the keys. How could this happen? Robert was always careful, precise. Nothing made sense. When we arrived, David and Michael were already there. That startled me. No one had called them, not me at least. But I was too panicked to dwell on it. Mom, David said, hugging me tightly. Dad's in bad shape. The doctors said a machine at the shop exploded. He's got severe burns and brain trauma. Michael's eyes were red, but his expression looked strained, more anxious than devastated. Almost like he was waiting on important news instead of grieving. Can I see him? I begged. Only immediate family, the nurse said. One at a time, just 5 minutes. Walking into that ICU nearly broke me. Robert lay bandaged head to toe, hooked up to machines barely recognizable. His breathing came only through tubes and wires. I clutched his hand, the only part untouched, and whispered, Robert, I'm here. Please fight. You've always been a fighter. For a second I felt the faintest squeeze. His eyes flickered beneath swollen lids. My warrior was still fighting. The next 3 days were hell. I lived in that waiting room, dozing in hard chairs, running on coffee and prayers. David and Michael stayed, but they were far more focused on doctors than their father. I overheard snippets of conversations, Michael asking about insurance coverage, David on the phone discussing life insurance and policies. On the second day, David turned to me. Mom, we looked at Dad's insurance. He's got $50,000 in life coverage. Plus, workers' comp could bring another $75,000. My stomach twisted. Why is he talking about money while his father's still alive? I don't care about the money, I snapped. I just want your father to get better. Of course, Mom, David said, his voice soft, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't ignore. A coldness. Like a machine ticking away in the back of his mind, calculating while his father fought for his life. On the third day, the doctors gave me news that broke me to pieces. Dr. Patterson, an older man with kind eyes, asked us to step into a small office. Mrs. Hayes, he began gently, your husband's condition is critical. The burns have caused a dangerous infection, and the brain injury is worse than we thought. We need to be realistic. I felt my throat close. What does that mean? I whispered, though my heart already knew. It means you should prepare for the worst, he said. Robert is in a medically induced coma. We could keep him alive, but the chances of him ever waking up are extremely low. My world shattered. 42 years of love, a lifetime built side by side, and now they were telling me it was all slipping away. We want to try everything, I sobbed. No matter the cost, no matter how long. But then I caught the look that passed between David and Michael. It made my stomach twist. Mom, David said in that practiced, calm tone, we have to think about what Dad would want. He always said he didn't want to be a burden. A burden? I exploded, the fury coming from somewhere I didn't know I had. He's your father. He's the man who raised you, who worked his whole life so you could have what he never did. He's not a burden. He's your dad. We know, Michael said quickly, his voice quieter but no less unsettling. But we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous, Mom. They could drain your savings. Money. Always money. While my husband lay dying, my sons were counting dollars. That night, when I was alone with Robert in his room, I held his hand and spoke through my tears. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't picture my life without you. And then, something happened that still gives me chills. His fingers twitched, squeezing mine with the faintest pressure. His lips moved as though trying to speak, though no words came out. I panicked and called for the nurses. He's reacting. He's trying to say something. But by the time they rushed in, Robert had gone still again. The nurse shook her head gently. Sometimes there are involuntary spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean consciousness. But I knew. I knew Robert had been trying to tell me something important. 2 days later, early Friday morning, alarms screamed through the hallway. Lights flashed. Nurses sprinted into Robert's room. I had been dozing in a chair outside, but the noise jolted me awake. No, no, no. I cried, running inside. For 40 long minutes, the doctors worked to bring him back. But at 4:37 a.m., Robert Hayes was pronounced dead. The pain wasn't just emotional. It was physical. I collapsed onto his bed, clutching his body while it was still warm, refusing to let go, refusing to accept the finality of it. An hour later, David and Michael arrived. They didn't look shocked. In fact, they looked prepared, like they'd been waiting for that phone call. They had papers, phone numbers, and funeral arrangements ready. "We already spoke to Spring Creek Funeral Home," David said flatly, as I sat crying uncontrollably. "And the insurance process has already started," Michael added smoothly. How could they be so organized, so efficient, so cold, just an hour after losing their father? The funeral was set for Monday. David arranged everything, barely consulting me. He chose the plainest casket, the shortest service, brushing off my protests. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he insisted. No, it was what he wanted, something quick and quiet, as if Robert's life didn't deserve more. The day of the funeral was gray and bitter, the kind of day where the clouds themselves seemed to mourn. I wore my only black dress, the same one I'd worn at my mother's funeral years earlier. My hand shook so badly that Doris had to help me fasten the buttons. "Be strong, Margaret," she whispered as she combed my hair. "Robert would want you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, as if half my soul had been buried already. When we reached the cemetery, the sight stunned me. The gathering was pitifully small. Only David, Michael, Jessica, Doris, the pastor, and me. For a man who had spent 70 years in this town, who had helped so many, it was unthinkable. Where are his co-workers? Where are our neighbors? I asked. "We didn't want to bother anyone," David replied quickly. "Dad was a private man. He would have wanted it small." That was a lie. Robert loved his community. He would have wanted them there. Why did David keep everything so secret, so rushed? During the service, I studied my sons. David looked solemn but kept glancing at his watch. Michael shifted restlessly, like he couldn't wait to leave. And Jessica, hidden behind a black veil, checked her phone. This was how they honored their father. With impatience, distraction, and detachment? The pastor spoke of eternal peace, of rest, of heaven's gates. His words rolled over me like empty wind. I didn't want Robert to rest. I wanted him home at our table, on our porch, in our life. When it came time to toss dirt on the casket, my legs buckled. Doris had to hold me upright as I sobbed. The sound of soil striking wood was unbearable, too final. And then right there at Robert's grave, my phone buzzed. A message. From the same unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My vision swam. My heart stopped. Was I losing my mind? With trembling hands I replied. "Who are you?" The answer came instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone slipped from my hands. Doris bent to grab it, but I snapped, "No," and snatched it away. I couldn't let her or anyone see. Not until I understood. "You okay, Mom?" David asked, coming closer with a mask of concern. I searched his face for answers, for clues. But now every glance, every word, every gesture seemed suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, slipping the phone into my purse. "I just need to go home." On the way back, my thoughts spun like a storm. Was this a cruel joke? Or could it possibly be true? If Robert was alive, who had we buried? And if not, how could someone know such private details about my sons? That night, my house felt like a tomb. I replayed every detail of Robert's accident. According to David, a machine exploded at the shop. But Robert was meticulous, almost obsessive about safety. Nothing in his shop ever broke without him fixing it immediately. And how had my sons arrived at the hospital so quickly? The hospital called me first. I was the emergency contact. Yet somehow they had gotten there ahead of me. And then there was the money. From the very beginning, they had been talking about insurance, about policies, about payouts. As if they'd been waiting for this moment. I needed answers. So I went to Robert's desk, where he kept all his important papers locked in a metal box. Inside, I found the life insurance policy David mentioned, $50,000. But I froze when I saw it had been increased from $5,000 just 6 months earlier. Robert had never told me. Who convinced him to do that? Even worse, I found another policy I had never seen before. A workers' comp plan taken out only 2 months prior. Worth another $15,000. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. The next morning I went to our bank. Mrs. Thompson, the manager who had known us for decades, greeted me with warm condolences. I'm so sorry about Robert, Margaret. He was a good man. Thank you, I whispered. I need to see our accounts. I need to know what's been happening. When she showed me the statements, my heart stopped. Over the past 3 months, thousands had been withdrawn. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Who authorized these? I demanded. Your husband came in himself, she said. He told me it was for shop repairs. That didn't make sense. I handled our household finances. Robert never spent without telling me. And repairs? There had been none. Do you have the signed withdrawal slips? I asked. She handed them over. It looked like Robert's signature, but shaky off, unlike his normally steady hand. Did he ever come in alone? I pressed. She hesitated. Once or twice I remember him coming with your son, David. He said Robert needed help reading the papers because his eyesight was failing. But Robert always wore his glasses. His vision was fine. Later that night, another message arrived. The insurance was their idea. They pushed him into it. It was a trap. Piece by piece the puzzle was forming. The raised insurance, the unexplained withdrawals, David helping with bank papers, the rushed funeral, it all pointed in one direction. The messages didn't stop. The next said, go to Robert's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you missed. I forced myself to return to the shop. But when I walked inside I froze. The place was spotless, too spotless. No burn marks. No broken machinery. No sign that any explosion had ever happened. What machine exploded? I whispered to myself. At Robert's desk, I found a note in his handwriting dated 3 days before his death. David keeps insisting I need more insurance for Margaret, he says. But I don't like it. Something feels wrong. I don't trust him. My hand shook as I read another note beneath it. Michael brought papers for me to sign, says it's to modernize the shop. I don't understand them. Why the rush? Robert had been suspicious. He had felt something I had been too blind to see. Then I found an envelope with my name. I opened it with trembling fingers. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. I've noticed strange changes in David and Michael. They're too focused on money, the insurance, the house. Jessica pressures them constantly. Yesterday, David told me I should think more about my safety. Said at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but it sounded like a warning. Please be careful. Don't trust anyone blindly. Not even them. I love you, Robert. The letter slipped from my hands. He had known. He had seen what I refused to see. That evening, David came over with a bottle of wine, smiling as though nothing was wrong. Mom, I've been thinking about your future, he said casually, pouring himself a glass. The insurance money is already in process. 15,000. How do you know the exact number? I asked, masking my suspicion. Oh, I helped Dad with the paperwork, he said easily. He wanted you taken care of. But I knew the truth now. Robert hadn't wanted it. He'd been pressured. And what do you think I should do with it? I asked, studying him. His eyes lit up. Buy a smaller house. Or better yet, a retirement community with medical care. Michael and I can manage the money, invest it, triple it for you. I bit back my fury. Triple it for themselves. Let me think on it, I said flatly. Of course, Jessica chimed in with her sugary fake smile. But don't wait too long. It's for your own good. When they left, I sat trembling with rage. My sons hadn't just abandoned their father. They had killed him. And now they wanted to rob me of everything left. That night, another message came. Tomorrow, go to the police. Ask for the report on Robert's accident. There are contradictions. The next morning, I marched into the station. Sergeant O'Connell, who had known Robert for years, looked puzzled. Accident report? He asked. Yes, I said firmly. The explosion at his shop. He frowned, flipping through files. Mrs. Hayes, we have no report of an explosion. No workplace accident for Robert at all. My blood ran cold. But my sons said. According to the medical records, the sergeant interrupted gently. Your husband was admitted with signs of poisoning. Methanol was found in his system. The sergeant looked at me gravely. The test showed a quantity of methanol that could cause blindness, brain damage, even death. The hospital should have told you this. I felt my knees weaken. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't even been an accident. My husband had been poisoned. Deliberately. Why didn't anyone tell me? I demanded, my voice cracking. He hesitated. The immediate family requested confidentiality. They told the hospital you were too emotionally fragile to handle such technical details. The immediate family, my own sons, David and Michael, had hidden the truth. They had invented the story about the explosion. They had fooled me, the doctors, everyone, to cover up what they had done. Mrs. Hayes, the sergeant continued carefully, if you truly suspect foul play, we can open an investigation. I didn't just suspect. I knew. My sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Michael came by with a bouquet of flowers and the same phony smile I'd seen on David. How are you, Mom? You look tired. I'm fine, I lied, studying him now with different eyes. Good, he said smoothly. Because David and I have been talking. We think it's time you sold the house. The market's strong right now and you need liquidity, for medical bills, funeral expenses. Lies. The funeral had been done as cheaply as possible, and the insurance had covered the hospital costs. I locked eyes with him. Michael, I said steadily, you knew your father didn't die in a work accident. For a split second, panic flickered across his face before he masked it. What are you talking about? I went to the police. There's no report of any explosion at the shop. His composure cracked further. Mom, you shouldn't be doing this to yourself. You're grieving. You're confused. It's making you see things that aren't there. The grief is confusing me? Or have you been lying to me? He stood abruptly, knocking over the cup of coffee I'd poured him. You need rest. We'll talk later. He rushed out, but I caught sight of him on the porch, whispering urgently into his phone. That night my phone buzzed. A message. Tomorrow they'll come together. They'll say you're imagining things, that grief has made you unstable. Don't believe them. And don't eat or drink anything they offer. The warning proved true. The next morning David and Michael showed up together, with Jessica trailing behind. They plastered concern on their faces and carried a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. Mom, we're so worried about you, David began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. The neighbors say you've been acting strangely. Doris told us you've been talking to yourself and not eating. That was a lie. Doris had never said any such thing. Jessica brought your favorite pastries, Michael added, waving the bag. And we made that special coffee you love. I remembered the message. Don't take anything they offer. Were they planning to poison me too? Thanks, I said calmly. But I already ate. Mom, Jessica insisted, smiling without warmth, you need to eat. You've lost so much weight since Robert passed. I'm fine, I repeated firmly. The brothers exchanged a glance, one I had seen before. The same look they'd shared at the hospital when the doctor spoke of Robert's prognosis. David leaned closer. We've been consulting with doctors about your recent behavior. My behavior? I asked coldly. Yes, he said. The strange questions, the visits to the police, the obsession with irrelevant details. It's normal after a big loss, but it can become dangerous if untreated. Michael nodded gravely. We spoke to Dr. Albright. He said it's common for widows your age to develop paranoia. Paranoia. They were calling me crazy. I'm not paranoid, I said with all the strength I had. I'm asking questions I should have asked from the start. What questions? David challenged. Like why there's no police report about your father's so-called accident. Like why the shop is spotless if a machine exploded. Like why you withdrew $5,000 from our savings without telling me. The silence was deafening. Their masks slipped and panic showed through. Michael tried first. Dad took that money for repairs. He wanted to surprise you. A surprise? I pressed. Yes, David jumped in. He was planning to remodel the house. Fix the roof, paint the walls for your birthday. If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the supplies? No one in town had seen anything. And as for the police report, David added quickly, Not every accident needs one, especially on private property. Another lie. Sergeant O'Connell had told me otherwise. Mom, Jessica said sweetly, we just want to take care of you. That's why we thought you'd be better off in a home. A special care home. A place for complicated grief, David added. They have doctors, nurses, activities. You'd be safe. And in the meantime, Michael finished, we can manage the house, the money, all the complicated things. It was clear now. Their plan was to declare me unfit, lock me away, and take everything. And what if I refuse? I asked. David's smile sent a chill through me. Then we'll take more drastic measures. We can start a legal process. We already have witnesses and a preliminary medical report. Either way, Mom, you'll get the help you need. A direct threat. They had even bribed a doctor to label me paranoid. I need time to think, I said, masking my fury. Of course, Jessica said, her smile sugar-coated poison. But not too long. It's for your own good. When they finally left, I shook with rage. My sons had killed Robert, and now they were coming for me. That night, another message arrived. Longer this time. Margaret, this is Stephen Callahan, private investigator. Robert hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected David and Michael. They poisoned him with methanol in his coffee. I have recordings of their conversations. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Meet me at the corner cafe. Sit in the back. I'll be there. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt hope. Robert hadn't died in vain. His caution, his instinct to hire help, it had left me a lifeline. The next day, I dressed in my purple dress, the one I wore for serious occasions. If I was going to face the truth, I wanted to be ready. At 2:30, I walked toward the cafe, every shadow making me cautious. Inside, I went to the back table and ordered tea, my hands trembling on the wood. At exactly 3 o'clock, a tall, gray-haired man approached. He carried a brown folder under his arm and looked me straight in the eye. Mrs. Hayes? He asked quietly. I nodded. I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm sorry for your loss. Robert was a good man. He sat, placed the folder on the table, and pulled out a recorder. Before I show you this, I need you to know it will be painful. Are you ready? I've been ready since your first message, I said. He pressed play. Robert's voice filled the air, so familiar it made me cry. Stephen, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. David and Michael have been pushing me to increase my insurance. Yesterday, David brought me papers he said were to protect Margaret, but I saw clauses that benefited them. I don't trust it. My heart pounded. Hearing his voice was like having him back, but his words confirmed everything. The tape continued. Michael's been asking strange questions about my routine, what I eat, when I leave the house. If Margaret comes with me, he says it's out of concern, but I feel like I'm being watched. Stephen paused. That was 3 weeks before he died. But there's more. He pressed play again. David's voice came through, cold and calculating. No, we can't wait any longer. The old man's suspicious. I already have the methanol. It'll look like a stroke or heart attack. Mom won't be a problem. After he dies, she'll be so broken. We'll do whatever we want with her. Tears streamed down my face. My son, my own son, planning his father's murder. Stephen's voice cut in. And this one was the day before Robert's death. Now it was Michael's voice, low and cruel. Everything's ready. Tomorrow, David will put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it's a vitamin supplement. He'll drink it without suspecting a thing. Symptoms start with dizziness, then blindness, then coma. The doctors had said Robert's death was heart failure, but now the truth was laid bare. My sons had poisoned him, and they had planned to poison me too. The evidence was overwhelming, but what weighed heaviest on me was not the betrayal itself. It was the fact that the babies I had held in my arms, the boys I had nursed through their fevers and nightmares, had turned into monsters. How could they? I whispered to Stephen. He looked at me with quiet compassion. Desperation and greed can twist men into things you don't recognize. But your husband knew. That's why he hired me. Hearing that made me cry again. Robert had been protecting me even in the shadows of his last days. The next hours at the police station felt surreal. Sergeant O'Connell and the district attorney reviewed every shred of evidence. They listened to David's cold voice describing how methanol would look like a heart attack. They heard Michael laughing as he called my husband an idiot for trusting them. They read the financial records that showed debts stacked like a mountain over my sons' heads. And they saw the photographs of David buying poison under a fake name. By the time it was over, the sergeant's face was pale with fury. "This isn't just greed," he said. "This is evil." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by photographs of Robert. His smile on our wedding day, his hands greasy after fixing bikes, his face soft as he cradled our sons as infants. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel helpless. I felt strong. Strong because justice was finally moving in our direction. At dawn, the police raided my sons' homes. David tried to talk his way out, denying everything, until the recordings were played. Then he collapsed into silence. Michael bolted out a back window and was chased for 6 blocks before they dragged him back in handcuffs. By 9 a.m., both of my boys sat in jail, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to kill their own mother. Jessica came to my house that afternoon. Her perfect hair was a mess, her face red from crying. "Mrs. Hayes, please," she begged, clutching my arm. "Don't do this. David isn't evil, he was desperate. I pushed him too hard. I'm the one to blame." I pulled away. "No, Jessica. You married him, but I raised him. He made his choices and so did you. Desperation isn't an excuse for murder." Her sobs filled my porch, but I closed the door on her. My family had already died the day my sons decided that money was worth more than their father's life. 3 days later, Robert's body was exhumed. The lab results confirmed what Stephen had promised. Lethal levels of methanol in his system. The final piece of truth. My husband hadn't died of heart failure. He had been poisoned in cold blood. The town buzzed with the news. Neighbors I had known for decades shook their heads in disbelief. People stopped me in the market, whispering, "I can't believe it." Their own father. The newspapers called it the crime of the decade. And then came the trial. The courthouse was packed. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks. Strangers filled the benches, hungry to watch justice unfold. I sat in the front row, wearing the black dress I had worn the day I married Robert. It symbolized my mourning but also my dignity. When David and Michael were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, I barely recognized them. Their expensive suits were gone, replaced with prison uniforms. They looked smaller, weaker, stripped of all the arrogance that had once dripped from them. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. The audio recordings where my sons planned their father's murder. The photographs of David buying poison. The financial documents proving their desperate debts. The medical reports confirming Robert's perfect health just days before he died. And then Stephen took the stand. Calm and steady, he explained how Robert had hired him weeks before his death, fearing for his life. He told the jury how Robert had been suspicious, how he had wanted to protect me. When they played Robert's recorded voice in court, I broke down. His words echoed in the silent room. "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Don't trust David and Michael." Gasps filled the courtroom. The jury members exchanged horrified glances. The defense tried to argue that the recordings were manipulated, that Robert had been paranoid, that financial stress didn't make men into killers. But it was useless. The mountain of evidence was too heavy. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom as he sentenced both of my sons to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, my hands folded in my lap, a strange calm washing over me. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase the grief. It didn't bring Robert back. It didn't erase the memory of holding my baby boys in my arms and never imagining they would grow up to kill their own father. As the guards led them away, David turned his head toward me, his face pale. "Mom," he whispered. I looked at him, but I felt nothing. My sons had died the day they murdered Robert. What remained were just criminals wearing their faces. That night, I returned home to the quiet of my little house. The walls still carried Robert's memory. His mug still sat on the kitchen shelf. His scent still lingered on his pillow. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch looking up at the stars. For the first time in months, I wasn't trembling with fear. Robert had always told me the truth would find its way. And now it finally had. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. We did it, Robert. We got justice. Rest now, my love. Rest. Stephen sat with me through every step of the trial. Just knowing he was there gave me the strength to face what I knew would be the hardest days of my life. When David and Michael walked into the courtroom in shackles, wearing orange prison jumpsuits, my heart broke all over again. But there was no pity left in me. Only sorrow. Sorrow for the moral death they had chosen long before they murdered their father. The prosecutor laid out the case piece by piece, his words sharp as knives. The recordings were played one by one. Each time the jury and the crowd heard my son's voices coldly plotting Robert's murder, the silence grew heavier. When the tape played where they discussed killing me too, a woman in the audience gasped and fled the room in tears. I couldn't blame her. It was almost too much cruelty to bear. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor began, this is not a case of ordinary greed. This is a story of cold, calculated premeditation. Two men chose to kill the father who raised them with love and sacrifice, just to pay off gambling debts and reckless loans. Their lawyers tried to paint them as victims of desperation, swayed by outside influences. But the evidence didn't lie. The recordings didn't lie. The bank statements didn't lie. The methanol in Robert's body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, my legs trembled but my mind was clear. I believed I had a good relationship with my sons, I said, looking directly at them. I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything so they could have more than I ever did. Their father worked from sunrise to sunset to give them the best life possible. Never in my worst nightmare did I imagine all that love and sacrifice would be the reason for his murder. Did you ever suspect your sons might hurt your husband? The prosecutor asked. No, I said softly. That's the most painful part. I trusted them completely. When they told me there had been an accident at the shop, I believed them. When they rushed the funeral, I thought they were just coping with grief. I never imagined they were covering up a crime. David lowered his head. Michael stared at me with defiance, but I saw tears brimming in his eyes. Too late for tears. The most devastating moment came when the prosecutor played the full recording of my sons planning my murder. Charles's voice was cold and steady. Once we get Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too. Gasps filled the room. People turned to me with pity and disbelief in their eyes. How did you feel when you first heard this recording? The prosecutor asked. I realized, I said, my voice breaking, that I had lost my sons long before I lost my husband. The babies I held, the boys I comforted, they had died long ago. What was left were strangers capable of unthinkable cruelty. The defense tried to twist my words, to suggest my grief had clouded my judgment. But the recordings spoke for themselves. Stephen testified next. Calm, methodical, he explained how Robert had come to him weeks before his death, fearful of his own sons. He walked the jury through the entire investigation. The medical examiner confirmed everything. The exhumation proved Robert had lethal levels of methanol in his body. The science was undeniable. After 3 days of testimony, the closing arguments began. The prosecutor's words cut through the room. David and Michael are not victims. They are predators. They saw their father and mother as obstacles between them and money. They planned, they executed, and they tried to cover up. They don't deserve pity, they deserve justice. The jury deliberated for 6 long hours. When they returned, the silence was absolute. My heart thudded in my chest. On the charge of first-degree murder of Robert Hayes, the judge read, we find the defendants guilty. Gasps filled the courtroom. David collapsed in his chair. Michael sat stiff, staring straight ahead, his face empty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margaret Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The judge wasted no time. David Hayes and Michael Hayes, for the premeditated murder of your father, and for conspiring to kill your mother, I sentence you to life in prison, with no chance of parole for 30 years. A weight I had carried for months finally lifted from my shoulders. Justice. At last, justice. After the trial, people hugged me, cried with me, told me they were proud. Doris whispered through her tears, Margaret, Robert can rest in peace now. That night, I returned to my house. For the first time, it no longer felt like a tomb of betrayal. It was my home again. The place where Robert and I had built 42 years of love. Stephen came by a week later. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "At peace," I said. "For the first time since Robert died, I can sleep through the night." He didn't die in vain. Justice was served. I donated every cent of Robert's insurance to start a foundation for victims of family crimes. That money was soaked in blood. I couldn't keep it, but I could turn it into something good. 6 months later, a letter arrived from prison. It was from David. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I regret everything. The money, the debts, it blinded us. We destroyed our family for nothing. Tomorrow I will take my life. I can't live with what I've done. Please forgive us. Tell Dad we're sorry." The next day, David was found hanging in his cell. Michael suffered a breakdown when he heard. He was sent to the psychiatric ward, where he remains to this day. 2 years later, my life has become quiet, steady. I turned Robert's shop into a garden full of roses, carnations, and sunflowers that chase the sun the way he always taught me to. Every Sunday, I bring flowers to his grave. His headstone reads, "Robert Hayes, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death." Stephen is still in my life. He visits every Wednesday. We sit on the porch with coffee, sometimes planting new flowers, sometimes just talking. He's become more than an investigator to me. He's family, the kind you choose, not the kind you're born with. The Ernest Hayes Foundation has grown bigger than I ever imagined. We've helped families across the state. People betrayed by their own blood. People who thought they had no one to turn to. A woman named Eleanor once hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "If you hadn't been brave enough to report your sons, I never would have had the courage to report my brother. That made every ounce of my suffering worth it." Do I miss my sons? Sometimes I miss the children they once were. But those children are long gone. The men they became were not my sons. Family is not blood. It is love, loyalty, and respect. It has now been 5 years since that first mysterious message reached me at Robert's grave. I am 71. My hair is white, my face lined with storms I've survived, but Doris says my eyes shine with a peace she's never seen before. Life is quieter now, but it is real. Honest. Built on truth instead of lies. And every night when I sit on my porch and feel the breeze, I imagine Robert is with me, smiling, proud that I kept my promise. I found the truth. I sought justice. And I turned our pain into hope for others. Your death was not in vain, my love.